Thanks so much, Emily, for the introduction, and to the Owens, Rachel, everyone here for having me. I'm really so happy to be here in Sackville, seeing some old friends and some new friends. Thanks, too, for all of you for coming. I'm really happy to see you all on a beautiful Saturday. So perhaps, could we turn off the lights? Yeah. Hey, perfect. Oh, now I feel very private. That's great. And I'm also so thrilled to have American Sign Language interpretation. This is Erin, and I also have Sayer, who will be helping with that today. Welcome you guys too. So I thought I would just put a slide up of some mushrooms. Maybe some of you can identify some of these species. I saw a bunch of mushrooms just walking here today. I took this photograph last fall after a mushroom foray. I've been foraging for mushrooms with the Mycological Society of Toronto and other groups for about 11 or 12 years now. And I thought I would start with mushrooms because mushrooms sort of make me think of everything. As an artist, I've always been interested in natural science, and I've always been interested in food and in exploring aspects of the non-visual senses. So that's something referred to by Jim Drobnik and Jennifer Fisher as being like taste, touch, and smell, and not so much with the auditory and the visual senses. But I think perhaps I'll start introducing some of my practice that's related to nature hobbies by starting with mushrooms. So when I started mushrooming, I kind of thought it would be a break from art making. I was a little curious about mushrooms as food, like most people are when they start. And I joined the Mycological Society of Toronto, and I found the mushroomers to be really funny, really funny, odd people who were really excited about like a little turd, or they would bring their long lenses for these crappy little rotting brown things. And it didn't take long, though, before I stopped taking pictures of sort of funny mushroomers, and I just started taking close-up pictures of mushrooms myself. It's kind of an addictive hobby. I'm sure out here, I spend a lot of time in Cape Breton, and that's really a place where I got interested in mushrooming because of this incredible profusion of weird colors and forms in the woods. And it was sort of irresistible to know beyond chanterelles what else I was looking at. But once I joined the Mycological Society and entered the full nerdery of the activity, you get to learn about deadly mushrooms and about mushrooms with interesting and provocative names. You start to realize how mushrooms are a part of culture. People didn't really understand how they grew in the night and without light. They would sometimes look like sex organs, or certainly you could die from sampling them. And so they have all kinds of names around demons and fairies and witches and Satan and things like that. And sort of a reflection of some of our fears and superstitions is also there in the woods. Anyway, so this is a picture of a mushroom foray in the Toronto area with the Mycological Society. So what you do is you pick mushrooms all morning, and then everybody brings the species that they collected, and you lay them out on a table, and usually it's some senior mycologist guy who does the big interpretation and tells you what you found. So I was doing this for a couple of years as my break from art, but inevitably you bring your artist self to these kinds of preoccupations. And I had this idea once when I was stuck in the rain in Chinatown in Toronto on my bike that, wow, there were so many mushroom species in a medicinal shop in Chinatown, and some things that I weren't even sure if they were mushrooms, and I had a hard time communicating and asking the staff in the shop I was stranded in. And so I proposed it to the Mycological Society. I said, could we do a mushroom foray in Chinatown and explore all the species in the city as opposed to in the woods? The members of the Mycological Society were super into this idea, actually, and they said, no, we're not going to Chinatown, that's for tourists. There's a lot of Chinese members of the Mycological Society, and they proposed we go to Markham, to the big Chinese shopping malls and supermarkets, and that's what we did as a Sunday foray with the Mycological Society. So when I first made this project, I wasn't entirely sure if this was art. I just sort of knew I wanted to explore this in this way, and as it started developing, I realized, okay, I guess this is my work now, kind of working with groups like this and you'll see how there are more examples of this to follow. So we actually, with the Mycological Society, we went to the supermarket. We, had an interpretation of all the canned goods. We went to the medicinal shops. A lot of the people in the Mycological Society spoke Cantonese and Mandarin. Some people knew how to cook some of the things we were finding in the stores. And it was just a really interesting, sort of funny way to be shopping, like with a group of people with baskets and field guides and speaking Latin and things like that, And at the end of this activity, we all went for dim sum, and we did our interpretation over dim sum. It was really cool. I got invited to repeat this piece actually in New York City, and I got to meet Gary Linkoff, who recently passed away, and he's the guy who wrote the National Audubon of mushrooms. He's like a mushroom superstar. And so it was actually during a snowstorm we did this big foray in Chinatown in New York City. We also went to Japanese and Korean and Italian and Eastern European shops and found a lot of species of mushrooms. Trying to think of the number here if I have it written down. But we certainly found jelly ears and cloud fungi, fungi that parasitizes caterpillars, stinkhorns, cauliflower mushrooms, hedgehogs. And as part of the project, when I exhibited it in a gallery, I had a botanical illustrator illustrate the specimens we foraged in the city, which that's there above. And Gary Linkoff, like the New York Mycological Society, was actually founded in part by John Cage. He was actually the first co-president of the New York Mycological Society. And many of these guys had foraged with John Cage and had corny jokes about black trumpets and things like that. But Gary Linkoff told all these amazing stories about feeding stinkhorns to Margaret Thatcher, and it was just like a fascinating cultural foray. And a really different way of discovering local species, like what it means to find, the species of Eastern North America. Suddenly the city threw all of that up into a kind of complicated new thing. And we found all kinds of things that were described by my field guides as inedible, for example, and sort of a wonderful twist on what we might normally just do in the forest. So from that project, I just threw myself into making my work in these contexts and working with groups of people like this. I did a piece in Vancouver with a group of mushroomers and a group of astronomers, and it was a project I called Terrestrial Celestial, and the idea was that I would have a kind of knowledge exchange, have mushroomers host the astronomers in the morning to gather terrestrial knowledge, and then astronomers at night to host the mushroomers and get some celestial knowledge. It was a kind of earth and sky and everything all in one day. I had thought of this project because a mushroomer once told me this funny story that they were walking through the woods, as mushroomers do, looking down, and they bumped into a group of birders who were walking through the woods looking up, and it was the funniest. It just stuck with me for years that imagine all the species the birders were stepping on and all the birds that the mushroomers, just all the things there were to know, like earth and sky in this space. And I just thought, why don't we do it all in one day? And I made this work with astronomers. I don't recommend planning an astronomical artwork with 50 people in Vancouver because of the weather. And it was hilarious. I used to send emails to the astronomers, and their tag of their emails would say things like, clear skies. And then I would send emails to mushroomers, and they were all like, let's pray for rain, because that's what mushrooms like. And it was a very hilarious kind of meeting of two nerd cohorts, we had, the mushroomers on the West Coast are very kind of hippie guys, and then the astronomers were sort of engineering prof people with their fancy telescopes they built themselves in their fancy cars, and a really interesting merger. And what I realized doing this piece, this kind of exchange where each of us took turns being students and took turns being teachers, and we did earth and sky in one day, was that mushrooming requires a kind of attentiveness that's very immediate and visceral, and you use all your senses, you taste things and smell things. Mushrooms don't last very long, sometimes just a couple hours, and they turn into goo in your hand. It's about seasons. It's a very sort of human and bodily scale. Astronomy, on the other hand, which I didn't know very much about, is really abstract and intellectual. You have to imagine that you're seeing back in time, in a scale that's just really inconceivable. And so for me, it was really interesting not just to do earth and sky, but to practice all these different ways of knowing and learning all together, like all in one day. It was really funny too, because as a mushroomer, the astronomers would bring binoculars into the woods and like big Tupperware containers really awkwardly to carry around, and all kinds of like cultural habits that didn't make sense in the other context. The mushroomers were all tired at night and our necks were getting sore, and so kind of an interesting collision of practices. Thank you. This is from a project called Apiary Videos. So in my work, I've indulged all my sort of nature preoccupations and obsessions. And I'm still a mushroomer, and I still work with mushroomers and lead forays and things like that. But this is from a project that stemmed from learning beekeeping. And beekeeping, just like mushroomers to me, were really interesting in addition to mushrooms. I became really interested in beekeepers themselves. Everyone likes honeybees, and I got into it because I love honey and was really curious about making some relationship to these amazing creatures. But it struck me after a while, learning this practice and joining clubs and things, that beekeepers were kind of interesting and special people, and they had certain skills, ways of comporting themselves and being in the world close to 100,000 stinging insects that were like a kind of special intelligence and a kind of magical power that I really was thinking a lot about. And so I was invited to be a resident at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and I had in mind this big crazy piece that would involve 100 beekeepers. And anticipating this project, I made a smaller version where I asked beekeepers from around the city to invite me to their apiaries, and I wanted to have them just like explicitly perform this stillness that they knew how to do, this very special way of being still and calm so that your bees are calm, and then when your bees are calm, you're calm. And it's like, I just wanted to kind of explore this very simple kind of stillness. And so I went to different apiaries, and which was super interesting too, documenting and being in all of these urban apiaries. Most of us have never been to an apiary for many good reasons. And so it was just an amazing kind of privileged access to go and visit all these beekeepers on like fancy rooftop gardens, by the waterfront, people who paint their own hives and things like that. The guy below, Kuldip, he is a customs official, and he was a very serious customs officer who had this amazing little apiary on his rooftop, and he lets his daughter paint it. And now, actually, he has huge apiary at Pearson Airport. So Pearson Airport has tons of bees. They're making like airport honey, which you can buy in Toronto. Really amazing. So that was a video montage of all of these different apiaries, and the beekeepers are just sort of performing their stillness. I didn't give them very much direction. I just told them this thing I was interested in, and they kind of knew immediately what I was talking about. And often they didn't dress up. They just sort of sat next to their bees. Some of them closed their eyes and were present with their bees in this way that they knew how. And a kind of very beautiful stillness, even though you hear traffic and all the city around them, sort of an amazing space. So apiary videos preceded and was kind of research for this larger performance that I did at the Art Gallery of Ontario called Your Temper, My Weather. I'm just going to talk over a video for a little while. Here's some documentation. So this was for Nuit Blanche at the AGYU. I was asked to do a Nuit Blanche project, and of course, they're big, loud, spectacle-y, things. And I thought, I wonder if I could make a big spectacle that's really quiet and really still, and created this project with 100 beekeepers. Some of them were professional beekeepers, amateur beekeepers, people interested in pollination, students of beekeeping, and it took me about a year to make all these relationships and convince all of these non-performance artists to be part of this project. And so we practiced this kind of stillness and comportment that calms bees for 5 hours in the museum live. And the more I got into this project, I realized how hard it is to ask people to be still for 5 hours. And it occurred to me that this actually looked and sounded a lot like meditation. And so I found a meditation instructor who was willing to help with kind of structuring this and supporting everyone in their stillness. And so there was a kind of sitting stillness as well as a quiet walking. It turned out that 2 of the beekeepers also taught meditation, and they led some of the meditations where we were humming, which of course wasn't intended, but once 100 people are humming, like it felt like the entire museum was vibrating. I mean, I was within this, but the humming was so intense, like with 100 people humming, and it sounded like bees. I kept trying to avoid the whole thing, like to be too literal a bee metaphor, but it sounded like a hive, a beautiful, calm hive, that frequency of humming. And so the piece was called Your Temper, My Weather, and I was thinking, like, when I started this project, how could I make something, if I can calm my 100,000 bees with my stillness, what could 100 beekeepers do with their stillness? Like, could we calm down the whole city? Could we change the air? I mean, it felt like we could change the air, even one beekeeper. And so I wondered if we could change the museum and change the city and change the climate, like just with our stillness. And it turned out being like a kind of sit-in, without any speeches or discussion. Just this kind of commitment to this gentle, sort of still activity. And there's people from all different aspects of the beekeeping world, with very different interests and probably opinions about, policies around honeybee health and climate in the environment and industrial agriculture. And so we weren't discussing it or arguing about it. We were just all there together, being still. So just to give you a sample. So this is not one of my images. This is an image from Gavin Preter-Pinney of the Cloud Appreciation Society. Have you heard of this place? So this is another of the clubs I belong to. I sort of feel like if I pay the memberships, I like learning things socially, and this was just too great to pass up on. You should all join the Cloud Appreciation Society. They have a manifesto. And I'm not sure if this is an art project or not, but it really feels like one. They believe that clouds are unjustly maligned and that life would be immeasurably poorer without them. We think they are nature's poetry and the most egalitarian of her displays, since everyone can have a fantastic view of them. And, we pledge to fight blue sky thinking wherever we find it, which I think is really great. So, what do you do when you're a member of the Cloud Appreciation Society? You look at the clouds and you learn how to identify them. You can sort of collect, like birders do, your checklist. If you've seen a cirrostratus or you've seen a, what are they called? Sundogs, or, different atmospheric effects. And so, again, I sort of get into these hobbies and activities without entirely knowing where it's going to go. At this point, I just trust that, as an artist, I'm going to think of something from within. And it sort of happens at a critical moment before I get too good at it. Once you get too good at any of these things and you learn too much, you stop being able to kind of see around and outside of it. And so being an amateur kind of at everything has its advantages, especially as an artist. You don't feel so loyal to a kind of history and tradition of a practice. And so my cloud identification skills, other than just sort of irritating everybody I know, constantly identifying clouds and getting distracted while driving, I kind of poured them into this project, which I thought I would show you this as it sort of precedes the video that's in the exhibition here. This is a piece called Cloud Party. And what I decided to do is take my kind of, popular science amateur cloud identification skills and use them out of context in the museum. And it occurred to me, I just used to run through the Canadian galleries, I'm kind of looking for contemporary things all the time. But it occurred to me, looking at paintings in the historic galleries, how many clouds there were and how fun it might be to identify the clouds in the paintings. And you start to see there are mistakes, so like impossible clouds and clouds that, and it gave me a whole new way to care about these artworks and just like a whole new thing to think about and a new pleasure in this context. So what I decided to do, Creative Time was in Toronto, and they asked me to do a project, and so I said, okay, I'm going to do a real hour-long, like, serious museum tour, except we're not going to talk about any of the artists, we're not going to say anything about Lauren Harris, we're going to just bring this, I'm going to teach people for real how to identify clouds, and I'm going to use the museum as my field. And so we walked around the entire museum, and I guided the participants through, various sort of stages of learning how to identify clouds and the different levels of the atmosphere. And then I realized that I took people into galleries where there were abstract works, where there were, sculptures, and, I could talk about, cumulus humulus and cumulus mediocris and cumulus congestus, in the Henry Moore Gallery. And I didn't talk about Henry Moore at all. It was like a really easy way to show people, okay, which one is this? And within minutes, the whole group could speak this cloud language in the galleries. We got to look at painting, in a new way. Like that's obviously an altocumulus, and we saw a full solar eclipse, like right in the moment of totality, and it was pretty emotional. And then, of course, at the very end, I could take everyone outside and see if the art was helpful to look back at life. Here I was asking all these really smart people at the Creative Time conference if any of them knew why the sky was blue, and no, but none of them did. And so we talked about why it was blue and how we're all in it together. Okay, so now we're closer to the present, but we'll go back in time. So that is a giant apple. I think it's a Rambo apple. I never documented it. It's in my partner's hand. I started to get into apples. I realize I have a kind of affection for like botanical identification and the names of things, and apples, much like mushrooms, are really interesting. If you know anything about how they're propagated, apples are always cloned, and so every Granny Smith apple you've ever eaten in your entire life is a clone of 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 one original Granny Smith apple tree. So if you planted all the seeds in your Granny Smith apple, you would get 5 different kinds of apples. They kind of reproduce like we do, like all their children are unique. And so when you learn about different apple varietals, which I started getting really interested in, you're also learning a story of human culture, like how we've moved around the world, some of our relationships and our conflicts with one another, certainly a colonial story. Europeans brought apples to North America, but there were also settler orchard in addition to indigenous orchards, which were eventually all stolen and destroyed by settlers. There were indigenous varietals of apples, which are almost all extinct. And so, and in the names of apples, you have some of these histories. Also, in the tastes of apples, you have a sense of how our tastes have changed, because apples kind of go in and out of fashion. And so, I love the idea of something so fascinating and so like cheap and accessible and fits in the palm of your hand. Today, and I brought something for you guys, I went to the farmer's market and they had Gravenstein apples, which you guys are probably not. So I brought a bunch. I don't know how you can eat these. Maybe you can just take a bite. Share it with your friends. I'm going to keep one to show. Keep a good one to show. So this is a very old apple. So they told me these were grown in New Brunswick. These are Gravenstein apples. Do you guys know these apples? Is this like a common apple for you? Yeah, because I don't see them in Ontario. And I knew they were Gravensteins because I read this beautiful description of them once that compared the coloration to the way a kid might draw fire. So it kind of looks like a painting of fire by a kid. And that's how I knew they were Gravensteins when I saw them at the market. I read a little about them before I got here just because they're your apples. And it says that they're from 1700s or earlier, probably originated in Denmark. And quite popular to this day, I guess, in Nova Scotia and maybe here. And also, they don't keep very well. So if you want to eat them, you have to eat them right now. They're not like popular commercial apples. Yeah, so have one and share them somehow. I wasn't that organized with a knife. Anyway, if you taste one, go ahead and taste them. If you taste it, what do you think? Like compared to a modern apple.
Pretty subtle.
Subtle, yeah. Like compared to a Honeycrisp, how would you describe that?
It's very soft.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cooking apple?
Yeah.
I think of it as a cooking apple.
Yeah, I think it's popular as a cooking apple. And this is evidence of, it used to be preferred that apples were soft and had a kind of melting flesh. And now we love, super sweet, super crunchy, super juicy apples. And so things like Honeycrisp are really popular. And this seems, like not my favorite apple either. But but beautiful. I mean, they're beautiful. So anyway, so you can see how apples are so exciting. And that's it. I went all out on the apple mania. And started doing research toward a project that I've been wanting to do for years. Dave and Rula were at this party and helped us taste some of these early ripening apples. So the project is called Orchard. And since I started learning about apples, it occurred to me that, God, I can't think of any better sculpture than a tree, especially like an apple tree. Just seemed to me to like do anything I could ever want a sculpture to do. And so for years, every time someone said, Diane, will you do a performance? I would say, how about an orchard? And no one could sort of cope with what this might, demand for a long, long time. And eventually, the city of Mississauga asked me to propose a public art project. And it was like my dream come true. I could plant an orchard as public art. I really wanted to do this as public art. And so this is a poster that was designed by J.P. King, and these are the 12 apple varietals that I decided to plant in this orchard. And the exciting thing was, this was not a kind of regular community garden where, you might choose like disease-hardy, varietals that are practical and easy to grow. I chose varietals that were old, that were eccentric, that were uncommonly beautiful or delicious, or, that were really weird. Like some of these varietals I chose, and there are just like thousands and thousands of possibilities. There's a Tolman Sweet, which is this very old, very sweet apple with a line down its back. And the description I read of the taste of this apple was that it tastes like, Calvados, like a cross between Calvados and Chanterelle ice cream, and a pear that fantasizes about being a pumpkin. Like, it was just like, I couldn't even imagine. Isn't that exciting? And then, some of my other favorite apples that I included in this is a Pink Pearl. And this is such a beautiful apple. Like, it doesn't last at all, right? That's why none of these are commercial. It has this, like, translucent, kind of pearly, creamy skin. And right through this thin skin, you can see that it has red flesh. So it's this beautiful, I call it like a fairy food apple. and extremely tart. It's like a bracing lemonade, and really vivid bright pink inside. Another one that is super exciting, I love the Kandil Sinap, which is this Turkish apple that's really long. It looks like a small mango, and the skin is often compared to porcelain. It's this beautiful thing you just want to hold all day. Some of the other apples that I included in this collection, I wanted a mix of colors, a mix of kinds of flavors, and there are 2 historic Ontario apples. So one that my orchardist says he didn't think anyone alive has tasted in North America because it was from like 2 generations ago. And so we tasted our first Pedro apple. He had 2 of them that his tree produced this year. And there's another historic Ontario apple, the Baxter, the big one, some Dutch apples. Oh, the little yellow ones are pineapple Renate. They taste like tropical fruit. Like, it's just amazing. So so this project is going on. I had a big apple tasting to sort of inaugurate the planting of this orchard, and invited this orchardist, Bill O'Keefe, from an orchard in Ontario. Super hard to find these apples, let me just tell you. Maybe there's some sources in the Maritimes I should explore, but Bill O'Keefe had about more than 500 varietals in his orchard, and he supplied and helped me with this research and supplied the trees for the project. And so this was just like a month or so ago in Mississauga, I had about 50 different varietals of apples that were supplied from this historic orchard, as well as from the research orchard for the University of Guelph in Vineland. And you can see below, those are pink pearls. They're beautiful. There are some apples that are even redder than that inside. And so the public came, and thousands of apples were tasted, and we learned about all these different varietals. I knew that the actual planting of the orchard would be kind of unexciting for the public, so I did that privately the following day just with city staff. We planted these 12 trees, and I included my son because this orchard, because it's public art, the city of Mississauga has committed to taking care of these trees, like every year, pruning them, everything, and in perpetuity. So I'm just still finishing my stewardship document, but like they have to replant dead trees when there's blights and molds and infestations and things die. I mean, technically forever, this has to be this orchard. And so for me, that's just like a huge big deal. I feel really so thrilled about that they have to take care of this orchard forever. And that people can, so here's the orchard. This is like, I haven't showed this to anyone. This is most of the orchard in the AV room before I planted it. It's so little. But eventually, the trees will be about 15 feet tall, and, in 10 years, it's going to be a really cool place. And so definitely come by and we'll eat pink pearls, in Mississauga in the future, I hope. Okay, so mushrooms again. Let me just go on. So it's been a few years now that I've been working on these projects with this kind of naturalist aspect. And my partner, Amish Morel, also, he's from Cape Breton, and a big hiker and guide and adventurer. The two of us, we realized we were always doing these kinds of projects and incorporating it in our teaching, and so we decided to kind of call it a thing called Outdoor School. And we led a residency in Banff, and we often lead public mushroom forays, and they're kind of different from the Mycological Society forays. I think we bring a kind of cultural perspective to the whole thing. So we were leading forays every year in Scarborough, and I was joking to them, not really joking, that this could be part of their permanent collection, a kind of annual mushroom foray in the woods. I still have to work that out. But these are some of my students at the University of Guelph. Every year I justify somehow that we have to have a mushroom foray with my art students. If it's a course about walking, obviously, about food, obviously, if it's about anything, I can kind of rationalize that we need a mushroom foray. It kind of occurs to me that this is so useful for artists. We're not the first artists to get curious about mushrooming, but it certainly does help you practice seeing things closely and paying attention to small variations of tone and color and little striations and little details. And also, it's, you realize that there's this entire kingdom, right? They're not plants, it's a whole other kingdom that usually we walk upon. It's like an unseen world. And so teaching students to see these worlds that are there that they haven't noticed before, I think is really valuable. Also, it's a world that is often maligned. It's kind of, fungus and shit and things decaying. And so paying attention to these things, bringing them into the light, I think it's a great exercise for students, and I just have a feeling it matters to all of us. But part of this course that I teach when I have a chance to at Guelph is called Outdoor School, and I bring artists to the apiary to do all kinds of things on campus because it's a kind of agricultural university. There's a research forest. This is just from a few days ago, so I thought I would show you. I had my students, we're working this year on an organic farm, which is super amazing, and we reenacted the raft of the Medusa. This was very funny, just like a couple days ago. I have to say, my students are so happy. Like, this is like, this was a few days ago. I'm constantly amazed what it means to make art, and this is something we're figuring out, outside of these buildings and rooms, and what happens if this is your studio and these are your materials, and just solving that has been really interesting. And sometimes it comes out in the term, and I hope it might come out in 10 years or sort of reverberate forever. Like I have the students, they're harvesting vegetables and learning organic farming while they're thinking about video art and environmental art projects, and so just something I'm sort of immersed in on the theme. I thought I would show you. That was from Banff. Of course, we had a mushroom farm. So we did this in Banff as well. I'm just showing you a bit of Banff because in the Banff Outdoor School residency, we had artists doing all kinds of outdoor activities. Like I have a list here: mountain climbing, mushroom foraging, meteorite holding, lunar eclipse imagining, sound bathing, rope climbing, clay modeling, bronze casting, photographing, recording, creative writing, boulder petting, riverside picnicking, meal sharing, beer drinking, plant identifying, quiet sensing, astrological divining, hawk watching, bear sighting, butterfly worshipping, cloud identifying, on, and seeing how these activities might inform projects. But I took you to Banff because I wanted to show you the mathematicians. I'm sure a lot of you guys have been there at the Banff Centre for the Arts. And so while we were doing all this work, I had a little joke with my son, who was 7 at the time. There at the Banff Centre for the Arts, there's also a research station. It's called BIRS, like the Banff Institute. I have it here somewhere else. Banff International Research Station, and they had conferences there at the same time we were there on microbial geometry and Langland's paramer spaces for periodic groups, analytic techniques in theoretical computer science, mathematics of the cell, mechanical and chemical signaling, like, et cetera, et cetera. And my son and I had this funny game at the buffet where we would sit and say, when people walked in and started to line up at the buffet, we would say, artist or mathematician? And we would guess, no problem, every time, who was an artist and who was a mathematician. Poor mathematicians, we made fun of them relentlessly. So essentially, it was a really hot summer when we were in Banff, and we were actually swimming in the Bow River, which is super cold glacial river. The artists, swimming, we were dipping in and quickly swimming in the Bow River. And I started having this idea, wouldn't it be great if we could get the mathematicians to swim with us? Like, maybe we could swim with mathematicians. And it started to become an obsession while I was there, that we might have this ecstatic, bodily, collision of worlds, that we might, imagine the possibilities. There was zero interaction between these two cohorts of people at the Banff Centre. And let's see if I can get my talk back. And so I started emailing the research station and postering the math and physics buildings, inviting them to swim with artists. And of course, I was trying to chat with those kind of tables full of mathematicians, during the meal times, which was not going very well, and saying we're all going to go swimming on Thursday night. Will you come swimming with us? And people were not even necessarily polite about it. And so I was a little discouraged. Like, here I am leading this residency and talking about social, kinds of practices and making art with groups of people, and I was pretty nervous that this was all going to fall apart. Let's see if we can get the talk back, hopefully. Cross your fingers. Oh my goodness, thank goodness. So, and I was stunned to discover when we all went out for the appointed time where we were supposed to be swimming with mathematicians, that the mathematicians, so I had these kind of quick and dirty posters all over the math building, and so, I had this idea, like, oh, they're never going to do this. Like, the artists are all kind of free and wild and sexy, and I'm never going to get the mathematicians to take off their clothes and come into the river with us. And I was wrong. The mathematicians showed up, and they came, and it was like the hottest, like, record-breaking day probably in Banff. It was like in the high 30s, and more than 40 people, including mathematicians and artists, showed up to swim together in the cold glacial water. And so despite like radically different worlds, like I think Banff has tried in the past, having a little like, wine and cheese so you can talk about your research, before, but they'd never seen anything like this. Like we were, half naked, swimming in this freezing cold river together and laughing our heads off because it was so cold and so funny. And, I was asking mathematicians, I was like, I thought you guys would not come. And they said, we talked about it. And we just thought they thought it was so funny that anyone would want to swim with them. And they also thought that this was a joke about them. And they said, well, we're going to show them. And so they came around and showed us how to swim with them. Anyway, so I was so thrilled with this, and it was like a really magical moment, and I don't know if it could ever happen again. Of course, everything is so beautiful in Banff, and the mountains in the background, and this amazing cold water, and all these different people swimming together. I proposed this piece, and I just got word about this a few weeks ago. I proposed this as a diptych. I think, oh yeah, this is Jamie Ross, who was just here. Probably you're still recovering on the right. Jamie, he was one of the residents in Banff. And these are two young mathematician guys who were just delighted to swim with artists, and now, they started sitting with us in the dining hall. I think this is a bad image, I think hard to see, but I proposed to Banff hanging this diptych. So it's a short text inviting mathematicians and artists to swim together, and we found an appropriate astrological, portentous evening that it could happen on every year. And so this will be hung, this diptych, in an art-centered site and in a math-centered site. And, the gallery, nobody official has to do anything about this. I just love the idea that people might look at it and maybe this might happen again one day, like forever. Yeah, my new thing is I want all my pieces to go on forever. So wouldn't it be great if that happened again? Keep an eye on the stars and stuff, and you should go if you can. So I wanted to show you a few more pieces about smell. And so here, I'll just go through this quickly, is from a piece I did in Toronto with tea sommeliers. I'm not getting into too many tea-based projects, but that's another community I belong to and thing that I've nerded out and studied. And tea sommeliers are really good at sensing things, right? Obviously, because they're smelling and tasting tea. I was asked to do a project on Stirling Road, which is a quickly gentrifying, formerly industrial stretch of road where the new Museum of Contemporary Art is in Toronto. And so, to make a long story short, borrowing some mapping tools by a UK artist, Kate McLean, we set out with a group of tea sommeliers to do a smell map of Stirling Road. And so this is someone smelling. We smelled everything in the neighborhood, a whole group of us, and J.P. King, again, pardon me, worked on this project with me, and he developed all these beautiful ways to record our smells. We had to think of a whole system of identifying and mapping these smells, and so this is an example of like a tasting chart for tea. And so we created a different one for like Stirling Road, and we had to map all the smells. There's a Drake commissary kitchen that's part of Stirling Road, and so we smelled all their 100 kinds of chilies and all their spices and all their brining octopus and their bread baking and the bleach and everything else. We smelled joggers and people walking by. It's right on the rail path. So there's, this neighborhood is super interesting. There's the former aluminum plant, which is now the MOCA, which is a totally contaminated site. We learned they made all of the aluminum for World War II. There's a railroad, so it smells like, creosote and diesel. There's a chocolate factory, Nestle, so the whole neighborhood smells like kind of cheap industrial chocolate. There's a brewery, so it's a super smelly neighborhood. And it's hard to see in this projected image, but with JP, we created this like portrait of Stirling Road based on smells, and with a big, almost poetic list of smells reported by all of our smellers. And it was a real challenge to figure out how to represent this, and so also, it's like a brief moment, that was this afternoon, and it's already all different, on a different season and a different moment. So an example of a smell piece, and here's another one. This is a project from several years ago, but I'm still thinking about it, and before I get to the pieces you're familiar with here, it was a kind of museum or gallery intervention. I was asked to make a piece for a commercial gallery opening, and it was really tricky. Like, how could I get kind of tired of entertaining at parties. Like, how can I make something critical and mischievous, but also beautiful, and that can kind of pass in this environment? And so I made this project called Cloud, and I had 24 people wear a gardenia boutonniere. All through university, I worked as a florist, and when we would get one gardenia in, for somebody's wedding, it would make the entire store smell like flowers. And so 24 of these was like chemical weapon almost. I mean, it was so intense, the smell of the gardenia. And so for 1 hour, the participants wore this flower in the opening. And it was it was almost like excess beauty, which was something really interesting to play with. And then, they all left and the smell dissipated. So another example of a sort of simple museum intervention gesture, this is a group of dancers, and so I'm making my way to the projects with dancers now. I still think about this piece a lot, and I think it may have precipitated Amanda Cachia inviting me to participate in this project. It's a piece called Falling Piece, and I worked with 6 contemporary dancers, just dressed as ordinary party guests, and we sort of infiltrated this gala benefit with thousands of people at the Art Gallery of Ontario. So what the performers were asked to do was to look like they kind of lost their balance, not to be drunk, but almost in a way, they staged about 100 different falls. And I was thinking that if you were at a party and you saw somebody fall, and then you saw like another or 2 other people fall, you might get like a weird feeling like that the museum itself is unstable, that it's slippery. And I was thinking about undermining some of the authority of this situation. And the dancers started to get really brazen. They would fall down like as a whole couple. There's some funny images. I love this woman with the 2 drinks who doesn't know if she should help. The security. I think John is in one of these pictures somewhere. Were you? Yeah. Even the security guards who were fully briefed that there were performers who were going to fall all throughout the evening, they were constantly convinced that this was real and were constantly helping and just like playing along with the performance without knowing. They would turn around and say, I thought that was one of those actors. And it was like always. And it was kind of interesting how this unfolded. People started to hear rumors that it was performance art. And so it kind of went viral after a while. And people stopped helping them. They were just falling all over the dance floor. But again, a kind of way of making the museum seem unstable and slippery. So a few more projects with dancers quickly. This is Valerie Kalem, who I worked with. She's a dancer who worked for many years with Toronto Dance Theatre. And I was thinking about interpreting sculpture like with the body and without speech, like with some kind of embodied relationship and in time, like to modern sculpture. And so I made a series of videos with modern sculpture in Toronto. And from that piece, I started getting interested in like going deeper into sort of interpreting art and interpreting exhibitions with the body. Amanda had started talking to me about this exhibition, working with bodies that are pathologized, disability discourses. And I had told her, I'd been reading books about American Sign Language and really interested in working with people from the deaf community. And so it kind of gave me enough permission to start to explore this more seriously and deeply. And before I made the piece in Gems and Minerals, I made this project with Relista Rodriguez, who's deaf and a performer, and Lucas Malkowski, who was also a dancer with Toronto Dance Theatre. And Lucas is hearing, but his dad is deaf, and he's been speaking sign language since he was born. And Lucas, as well as interpreters I spoke to and other consultants I spoke to, really taught me a lot about how to work with American Sign Language. And I hope if you have questions about American Sign Language, I'm certainly not qualified to answer them. Sayer and Aaron said that they could answer some questions, and of course some questions should only be put to the deaf who could speak to these things. But so it was a long process, but what we did was Lucas was interpreting artworks at the art fair, at Toronto Art Fair, and I wrote a script in advance. These were kind of mischievous interpretations, and I picked some broad themes of art like space and form, touch, nature, and I wrote these scripts that Lucas sort of stylized and danced. And I started getting really interested, or increasingly interested, in behaving badly with your body, like in inappropriate ways in these kinds of contexts. And so the art fair is a very particular, commercial, sort of expensive context. And it was really fun to kind of intervene and make these mischievous critiques that probably most people couldn't understand and didn't even want to watch us do. And so I thought Sayer and Aaron agreed to try and simultaneously translate what Lucas is saying in a couple of these videos. And I've never done this before. We'll see what happens.
Let's talk about a beautiful woman sitting, someone else beside them. They're chatting, having a conversation about something funny. I can hear it, I can touch it. What is he saying? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh. Let me feel some more. His eyes. What is his face saying? What is he telling me? Okay, I found it. I get it. Oh my goodness. The interpretation of this from Sarah would be a message coming from someone else through space, through the body into my body and back out again. And I'm taking that message in through my hands. The idea of thought and knowledge being stuck inside a person's body. You can't access it auditorily. I have to touch you. I have to touch your face. Maybe I'm touching something else. But in order to get that information, you have to let me touch you. All of you. maybe I can think what you think. Maybe by touching, we can communicate. I wonder.
So I did warn these guys they would have to do that, but I didn't let them know the original script. You can see how we made these videos. So Lucas is, there was an original script, and Relista, who's deaf, is actually giving signs to Lucas, almost like a prompter. And Lucas was like catching them in the air in a way and dancing them. And so this isn't a kind of real official sign language. This is a very stylized, danced version. And can I ask Sarah and Aaron to talk about what you see when you're looking at these performances?
So Sarah's on, so I'll explain. When we see, it is a dance version. What I see is, I see signs incorporated in a movement that is interpreted by how he intends to express it. So I'm not getting 100% of what he intends to express, because like Sarah explained, I see it with my schema and my life experience. So it's more of a dance interpretation.
Yeah, thanks so much. I wanted this to be legible, like at least choreographically, for people who couldn't speak sign language. And so he was really exaggerating, and obviously he's not doing a kind of straight accessibility tour. Like, it's obviously not, like, because you'll see in the next video, we'll do another short one, his behavior starts to get, even more exaggerated and kind of inappropriate in the context.
But a deaf person would see something different than me, because it's
Yes.
not a second language. I have to work a lot harder to see what maybe his intent meaning is, whereas a deaf person would have that automatically because they're so visually in tune.
Right. My understanding was Lucas was taking a lot of liberties with the text, so that it was like half dance, half, on text, on script. So here's another short one. I made 5 of these. See if I can get it to play. Oops, that doesn't seem right. This is nature. And just watch what's happening in the background.
Oh, this place. It's changed so much. It's a bat taking flight. I can get off the ground. Mosquito smelling for things. It's an insect of some kind. Fight for survival. Somebody's eating someone. Rain falls and I'm so thirsty. The plants are growing. Everything's sprouting. It continues to grow with the sun. Bees float from flower to flower, person to person.
Just see the people chatting next to him.
As the trees grow, animals will frequent there. People will eat from the trees. Plant the seeds from the apple and have new apple trees grow. That's more sprouting. I actually wait. that have holes in them, some that are quite small, some that are large. Lots of varieties. Some that grow slowly. And the wind blows. Pieces are taken of me as people take more and more from the tree. Water rises. Water rises higher and higher on the ground. When the storm is over, you kind of dust yourself off, get yourself back together. Warm up a little. The bandages are cold. Leaves tossing around. Faster and faster. The trees in the air. And ripples through it.
Thank you so much. So interesting to hear that. I remember what the original script is, and so interesting to hear your interpretations, like what you draw from it, and what's visible without speaking sign language too. It's so over the top. That particular script I wrote was a kind of fantasy of a real natural environment. And one with life in it, because it was like this fake natural environment with the grass and stuff. And so he was imagining real trees growing and food and bats and wind and all kinds of things that would be really disruptive to the art fair. And I love watching the people, the weary server and the people who are there to look at art who don't notice it at all, even though his body is just like exaggerating everything. He's on the floor. It's really outrageous and amazing how it was such a joy to work with this language that is quiet. And it occurred to me, we can say whatever we want and anywhere we go. And there's a certain privilege sometimes to being like underestimated or dismissed. It's like, wow, we can get away with anything. And that was really a joy. And Lucas is such an amazing performer, it was irresistible to work with him again. And so here we are. This is the work that's in the Owens right now, and I was so thrilled to get to make it for this exhibition. It's called Gems and Minerals, and so in this project, I got to shoot this at the ROM during real open public hours. And again, I explained to them in all honesty, we were gonna come and do, ASL interpretations of the geology collection, and so we got to do that, except it was scripted, and I had a lot of extreme joy in writing my own interpretations of this collection. And so usually in a geology collection like this, and it's quite beautiful, you have like a couple of discourses at play. And the two main ones are the sort of science, geology, physics one, and the other one is mining PR. So in this image right here, you're seeing released next to $1 million gold coin and a big interactive thing for kids to learn how to mine minerals and natural resources. And usually exhibitions like this are also sponsored by mining companies, and the more I researched this collection, I realized that this is all sponsored by Barrick Gold. if you Google Barrick Gold or start to look up some of these major Canadian companies, I found just hundreds and hundreds of articles about crimes, environmental crimes, social crimes, interpersonal crimes, and it was quite astonishing. And other things I tried to introduce as a discourse that's not visible in these collections is talk about some of our funny relationships to these things, because it's quite fraught. I mean, we depend on these materials in all kinds of ways for our contemporary lives. And also sometimes we just love them, like they're beautiful, right? And so I wanted to introduce all of these kind of conversations that are not allowed in the official interpretation. It's not science, it's not mining PR, it's talking about violence and crime, it's talking about, excessive feelings, also just make up things that could happen because of all these relationships we have. I did get to talk to the curators, and they did start to tell me some funny stories about things that happened. Like they did tell me that they had a family of creationists who started crossing out with like a knife the dates on things. They told me that they have to clean the glass all the time because people are constantly like drooling on the diamonds and all certain collections. They told me a few other things. I don't want to reveal them all, but I had fun imagining sort of quirky, hilarious things that might happen like with these powerful objects. That, relationships to them, some true, some based on something true, some totally fabricated. And so in this project I worked with Valerie Kalim, who is hearing, and she's a dancer with TDT, with Lucas Malkowski, who's a child of a deaf adult and a dancer, and Relista Rodriguez, who's a super interesting person, and we'll watch it a little. I think I'll just show you a short clip, see if I can find yeah, I think I just want to find a spot to start. Yeah. It was super interesting to me in rehearsing this project and shooting it, like really different ways of speaking American Sign Language. And I think Sarah and Aaron can speak to this better. But Lucas, as the child of a deaf adult, he's been speaking it since he was born, but he's self-conscious that it's not very good. And Sage is really a technical speaker. They went to Gallaudet, the deaf university. Rally is super expressive and performatic, and her ASL is just so different from everyone else's. So I'm just picked a random spot. Again, I kind of love the idea of, interpreters gone wild, and doing all kinds of things they're not allowed to do, or inappropriate in various ways. So the museum was open while we did this. So maybe I'll leave it here, because of course it's in the gallery. But I wanted to show you that clip so you could see, how Raleigh, for example, takes several minutes to say the word murder. Like, we were shooting this in the museum with, ROM handlers like on either side of me, and Raleigh was sweating. I was we were all sweating just watching this unfold, and hand it to the ROM, who didn't censor anything. They were very accommodating and understanding. She enacts violent sexual assault in the gallery during open hours, and it's really visible what's going on, regardless of your fluency in American Sign Language. Valerie Kalem's role was, she doesn't speak American Sign Language. She was the kind of just having these kind of bodily engagements with the specimens, and throughout the piece, she has some more extreme than others. She's on the floor and kind of rapturous ecstasy in one part, and crossing certain boundaries with her body all throughout. And so that's everything I wanted to show you today. If you had some questions about that piece or any of the others, or about American Sign Language and deaf culture, ask us. Thanks. Yeah, it's such an important question. Thanks. It's been challenging and very, very slow. I started reading books about American Sign Language and about deaf culture and history. And I started talking to people. I knew an interpreter who gave me a lot of advice and who told me right from the start that you can't make something about American Sign Language unless you work with the deaf, because the deaf don't always have an opportunity to speak their language in public, and this would be a very important thing to do. And again, it was very slow making those relationships and learning how to do this in a considerate, appropriate way. When I invited Lucas to work on the art fair project, he said, I'm not doing anything unless you also include deaf people. So I learned that, how I had to work that out too and see how that would be possible. I've learned a lot, but I'm still very much an outsider from this community. I think when Amanda invited me to make something about, from within these discourses, it gave me a little more courage to, be supported by people from disability communities and deaf cultural communities. It's a very long, kind of slow process. And, I also, from listening to deaf people, they say hire deaf people. I wasn't helping these performers. They're professional actors and dancers. And so I hired them and learned how to work together. It's so funny, too, because it was a lot easier to communicate than I expected. And I kind of realized, why don't I have deaf friends? I need more deaf friends, because now, I could walk around town with Sage and we would just text each other. We could communicate perfectly fine. I found that my friend's husband, who's a film and TV guy who did the video for this, I had a way harder time communicating with a film and TV guy than I did with my performers who were deaf. There's a lot to say about it, and I'm still learning, and I think I'm really grateful I had a chance to meet these performers and work with them and learn a lot more about the language. And, really it was very much a collaborative project to interpret this text and, enable the performers to do their art too, in terms of how they interpreted the text. And so there was a lot at play. Maybe Erin and Sarah, you could speak a little about working with the deaf.
Sure. So in terms of interpreting, the first thing that we typically say is we wouldn't be here if deaf folks weren't here. The language that we use is from them. And so, like you were talking about, it's really important to recognize that. And so that's definitely the primary kind of byline of the interpreting community, is like, without the deaf, we would not exist. And I think that this piece of art is beautiful because it is that as well, right? Without deaf folks giving us art in their language, this piece wouldn't be here. So.
Yeah, I think it was really a privilege to sort of learn more about this, very extraordinary language that's visual and embodied and so expressive, and so just, reconciling an interest in dance and language for me. It was just such an amazing opportunity to think about that with others and, make friends within that community too. Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to say about it too, or are you? Yeah. No? Just curious. Yeah. No, I think it's very, very sensitive, and I'm constantly nervous about doing it. I kind of consider it in a responsible way, and so a lot of consultation and relationships, and it took a lot of research and trust and things had to come for it to be possible. Yeah. Because I worked with meditation instructors, they said we have to do a debrief, because it's quite intense actually to sit for 5 hours and this sort of meditative state. And I'm trying to remember, I think something that really struck me was how natural this came to the beekeepers, doing this. People didn't need a lot of direction or support. It was something that they practiced all the time. And I think like anyone, if you've been to any kind of meditation or retreat or something, people are moved by it and calmed by it, and creates, insights that are different for everybody. Yeah. Bees? Thank God, no, no bees came to the gallery. There might be some dead ones somewhere in my bee suit, but yeah, probably not. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's this big. That's why I didn't make much of it, because yeah, so that's all part of the stewardship agreement, is that it would be an orchard with food to give away to people in the neighboring community, that groups and community members, kids, people would have relationships to the orchard, and so there would be urban agriculture education, or there might be, how to prune your fruit trees, or how to start your own urban orchard, or also, cultural activities, picnics under the blossoms, or performance art, I don't know, right? So, I won't be in control of it all, or I can't really promise the rest of my life to it, but certainly I'll be a part of it wherever I can, and, and it belongs to the city of Mississauga, so. Well, I know, I'm still making the rules. If you can think of any bad things that could happen, I'm already nothing within 20 feet, and but if anything happens, they have to replant the trees and find, eccentric trees, old trees, beautiful trees, they have to follow a lot of, but, part of this delights me too, that it's, it's public art, it belongs to the world, and we'll see how it's, yeah. They can't, they have a club there that does all these war reenactment. I'm going to put it in the stewardship, no war reenactment around yeah. I'm going to have a few, if you can think of any others that I should prohibit, I'll add it, yeah. Yeah, there are, because apple trees have to be propagated, you have to cut off a branch and attach it to a new baby tree. You won't have the same apple unless a person is propagating it deliberately. But there are old varietals. The orchardist I worked with has one cultivated since the Roman Empire. And so that means a guy, a person, cut a stick and gave it to the next orchardist, who gave another stick to the next orchardist for, several thousand years, which I find just awesome. Oh yeah, sometimes, now that I've been, into my apple varietals, like the seam on the Tolman Sweet is really distinctive, and I found 2 trees now in Toronto, just like growing next to a convenience store, like totally, mangled and unloved, and it's like a Tolman Sweet because 100 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, it was much more popular in Ontario, and sometimes, I don't know who can identify them for you, but you can find beautiful old varietals. It's just people may have lost a sense of what it was, Yeah. Again, I'm thinking I think this is true sometimes for women. I'm smiling, people just don't think I'm going to do anything that bad. Unfortunately, I think there's not a lot of rigor and attention. I think, the art fair piece, I had no sense, the AGYU who had commissioned me to do that, I had no sense they knew what was happening at all, actually. We just got to do it. I think it's great if you can capitalize on ways you might be dismissed or underestimated, if possible, to do, critical things. I think you should, yeah. I'm honest with people. They're not really paying close attention, so. And it's not that aggressive, right? It's a subtler sort of mode, yeah. We just got in trouble for the fossil. She scratched her foot. That was the worst thing we did, actually. That was yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things in there. It's interesting that you relate these kind of forever pieces to my kid, to be honest, because I've been a mother now for 9 years. I'm not always sure how it informs my work, but one thing that I think with the Apple project, which I've been thinking about for a couple of years, having a kid has really made me understand the long game. And so I have a sense that the time is going to go by, and that really has informed these pieces that I want to kind of extend out beyond me and into the future. And I'm not sure what else I can say. I'm an educator. I'm compulsively probably, I'm like a big sister, constantly teaching everybody everything. I'm super excited about all these things. And so I think, inevitably these things are going to infuse into my professional teaching and my informal teaching, and everyone around me has to know what all the clouds are and all the mushrooms are. My son has to follow along and all these things. He incidentally says, he talks about his first Banff residency and his second Banff residency. He's really pretty funny. He was 6, and it's a shame, I keep seeing how, I don't know if it's like this maybe in New Brunswick, but in Toronto, kids are not included in an art community. It's funny, we call it a community and there's no kids in it. It's really bizarre. Once you have one, you really see that absence, and I guess it's just not separable for me. So yeah, the future is a part of my work, and education is always a part of my work too. Yeah. No, never. I never have an artwork and then I say I'm going to join this group. I always, at this point I know myself. So if I'm going to start studying, Ikebana or tea sommelier or whatever, I know it's probably going to come, and then I can justify spending some grant on it, and I can justify, I just sort of hope that. It's sort of multitasking. I'm doing all these things I love, but it's work. And so I definitely joined because I'm really curious and I like it. And then and you can't make anything unless you you know people, and, you know, the beekeepers know you and trust you, and you know enough to talk to them about, you know, their apiaries and their, you know, pest control or whatever. Like, I'm part of these communities, and so it makes these things possible. And so, like, this year with my students working on the organic farm, like, I'm trying to teach them, you can't just, like, sit in the studio and think of a piece about, you know, vegetables. Like, you know, my students have never planted anything in their life. And so, you know, we have to plant things, and we have to befriend our, you know, the farmer who's in charge, and because then she's going to let you come and make your video there on a Saturday, and, you know, and so this process of making relationships, being a part of it, learning by, like, doing and you know, is really critical for these projects to happen. It makes it hard for me to make projects in cities I don't live in, because I can't just, like, show up and get 100 beekeepers. Like, this is like all the beekeepers in Ontario. Like, I was schmoozing beekeepers for a year. Like, that was my job. And I was the artist in residence at the AGYU, and they have this big glass window, and so you can watch the artist, you know, do art things. And so I'm just so self-conscious, because all I do is send emails. Like, the artist is still sending emails, but that makes that kind of possible. Yeah. No, but it takes years. Like, you know, the apple project, I think I've been, like, working on my own apple tree. It's been about 4 years to get to the orchard. I've been mushrooming for 11, 12 years now, beekeeping for 10 years. Yeah, I can't sustain them all. Like, don't tell my Ikebana teacher, but I can't do it anymore. You know, it's really hard, but yeah. No, I don't know. It's sort of compulsive. I have lots of things I still want to learn, you know. Yeah. I need to retire, I think. Yeah. Anyway, should we wrap it up? Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah and Aaron, for the interpretation.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, really great.